All right. Is my sound working? All right, hello everyone. We're a couple minutes early, so I'm gonna wait a few minutes for in case a couple other people are gonna join. But I'm glad you all could join me. I'm hoping that this will be very eye-opening to a lot of people, and I'm hoping that the people that are actually here live are gonna ask some questions. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. This is also going to be uploaded permanently to YouTube, so if you want to go back and rewatch anything, it'll be there, and then all the people that are not watching it live obviously can also go back and watch that live. But I'm going to wait a few minutes in case there are any other people who are going to join a little bit late. Just a quick sound check. If anyone is in the comments, uh, just just type anything if you can hear me fine. All right, awesome. Thank you. Uh, so I'm gonna get started now. The first couple slides are not super duper important, so if anyone joins late, they're not gonna be missing out on a whole lot. So first off, a quick little introduction. I'm Justin. I am the head coach of Krieger Endurance Training. I work with a couple other teams, primarily Michigan riders. So I do work almost primarily with junior riders. So junior specific nutrition is a pretty often question I get asked. So I figured instead of answering everyone individually and kind of answering the same questions, I figured it'd be nice to give a pretty thorough presentation. That way, everyone gets a good idea of like good starting points, good best practices to have, and just kind of spread as much information as I can. So, just base level, starting out, why exactly is nutrition important? Well, in the most basic concept, nutrition is just applied biochemistry. Everything you eat is a chemical. The things that you eat, whatever they turn into in your body, or even the raw materials, they directly change different processes that happen in your body. They're directly responsible for specific processes. So if we can control the specific nutrients going into our body, we can control how well and which specific processes we can actually use. So this is important for athletes specifically because if you're an endurance athlete, the way you create energy using foods is different at low intensity, i.e., like endurance riding, versus super high intensity, like in a race. The way you use your fuel is different. The types of foods you should be eating is different. Um, there is no face camera for this. This is just the presentation. I don't have quite enough bandwidth on my internet to stream multiple videos at a time. That'd be nice in the future, but um, yeah. So the things you eat specifically impact your performance and recovery and all the other things that happen throughout your life outside of training. So starting at the most basic part of nutrition, how much should you be eating? This is especially important for junior athletes because a lot of them don't eat enough. Junior athletes often eat too few calories. A lot of them are just simply unaware of the suboptimal fueling that they're doing. It could be because they're busy doing schoolwork during school and after school. They're just busy doing all kinds of other stuff. They just don't feel hungry. There are lots of things. There's also psychological factors like um, if you have unhealthy relationships with food, for example, all kinds of different aspects that can contribute to underfueling. So that's the number one most important takeaway. If you don't really pay attention to anything else in this presentation, you're probably not eating enough. So as far as actual training, you should, like I mentioned earlier, the way you use fuel at high intensity is a little bit different than the way you use fuel at rest or at lower intensities. So if you are doing hard workouts or you're doing a race, ideally all of or almost all of your calories you want to be coming from sugar. The simpler the sugar, the better. I'll go into the reason why all this stuff is important later in the presentation, but during exercise, as sugary, as simple as possible, ideally, and then during the non-exercise periods of your daily life, rest of your day, um, the carbohydrates specifically should not necessarily be sugary. They should be more complex, whole food type um, whole foods. And obviously, there's other things that you got to take care of, like your protein and your fat requirements and all the vitamins and minerals. But this is just the super basic beginning, and then we'll get into some of the more nuanced topics in a minute. So net energy balance. Simply, this is how much of a calorie deficit or surplus that you're in. So this is the single most important thing for whether or not you gain or lose weight. If you're in a deficit, you will lose weight. If you're in a surplus, you will gain weight. There's no real way around it. There are some highly technical, highly nuanced um, additional aspects that contribute to those things, to gaining or losing weight, and in the way that you do it. But in the aim of being as simple and easily understood as possible for 99% of people, this is all that matters for gaining and losing weight. It's also the lowest hanging fruit. Like I said, most junior athletes are not necessarily eating enough, so simply eating more, if that is the case, which is for the vast majority of them is the case, it is the easiest and simplest way to gain additional performance. And then along with just eating more is being consistent. If you're eating in a 1,000 calorie surplus one day and then a 1,000 calorie deficit the next day, you average out to be in the correct range over a longer period of time, but it's not consistent. You're eating too much and probably not feeling great during your workouts if you're eating too much. And then also similarly, but on the opposite side of the spectrum, if you're not eating enough, you are going to be chronically underfueled. You're not going to be able to optimally recover from your hard workouts, and then also obviously not be able to perform as well as you could during these hard workouts. So, how many calories does cycling actually burn? There is a interesting coincidence in the efficiency of a bicycle and the efficiency of the way the human body works on the bicycle, where 1 kilojoule of work, which that means the amount of actual work you're doing, putting into the bicycle, um, is roughly equal to 1 calorie burned, or rather, 1 kilojoule every minute is roughly equal to 1 kilocalorie burned every minute. So, where do you get these numbers from? If you have the luxury of training with a power meter, either on the trainer with Zwift or outdoors with a regular bicycle power meter, um, then you can directly calculate work from the pedaling motion. This doesn't really take into account if you're mountain biking and you're using a lot more, you're expending a lot more energy using your upper body and your core, or other highly technical aspects like oxygen kinetics and the way that that whole process changes as you become fatigued and in longer rides. But it is more than accurate enough to give you an idea and a basic understanding of kind of how many calories you're burning. If you are familiar with riding on Zwift, I do have a couple watt numbers here and how many calories they burn per minute on average. So 100 is 6 calories per minute. And then you can see, you can kind of extrapolate every additional 100 watts is an additional 6 calories burned every minute. For someone said, would it be better to cycle those, like being a surplus one day and then a smaller surplus the next day? That is an option. That is one of the more advanced things that you can do with your nutrition. I'm not necessarily going to get into that today because there are so many other low-hanging fruits for junior performance-oriented athletes, endurance athletes, that you can get some additional benefit from cycling like that, but it's a lower percentage of performance gain compared to a lot of the other things that you could be doing instead that are easier. Um, and going back to the calorie burn, if you don't have a power meter, a lot of you may notice if you use Zwift or any other fitness tracker like an Apple Watch or something like that, it'll tell you how many calories you're burning based off of your heart rate. It's not going to be nearly as precise or as accurate as using a device that is directly measuring the amount of work and energy you're putting into the bicycle. So it's not necessarily going to be quite as accurate when you're calculating your calorie burn and how many calories you need to be eating. However, for this example, it is going to be close enough. Using some of my own personal data, using a power meter and what it says that I burned in based off of the data from the power meter, and then also what Strava calculates my heart rate based calorie burn from, it's roughly 10% different. So Strava will say that I'm burning about 10% more calories than my power meter is saying. For most riders, this is not an issue because for most junior riders, this is not necessarily an issue because you're not riding huge hours every week and you're not riding at super duper high powers. They're not relatively heavy, super strong riders yet. So it's not that 10% is a smaller portion of their daily calorie burn. Whereas if I'm looking at more elite level riders that could be burning 3 or 4 thousand calories in a single ride and doing that several times a week, that could be the difference between gaining and or losing several pounds every month without knowing that they are, or without understanding why, because that the calculation is off. But for most junior athletes, this is not going to be an issue. So all of that's kind of complicated math. I'm sure none of you are really going to use that in the real world. So instead, I have pulled some data from a couple research papers that are done on high-level adolescent runners. So there is obviously a difference in the way your body burns calories in running versus cycling. Like I said, um, there's an interesting coincidence where the amount of work on a bicycle is equal to the amount of calories. That's not the case with running. Running is a lot less efficient, so you burn more calories for the same amount of work. But there are relatively large ranges in this study for what they deem as acceptable uh, calorie expenditure ranges. So I find them to work more than well enough for the majority of athletes. So basic metabolic rate, that is simply the amount of calories that you burn just existing. That is, if you were just sitting all day, not doing anything, that is the amount of calories your body burns just surviving. Non-exercise activity thermogenesis, more ubiquitously referred to as NEAT, is all of the additional things you do on top of that that are not exercise. So walking around, walking up and down the stairs, doing your daily life tasks, that is NEAT. If you are a weight loss patient and you're trying to lose weight, the two most effective ways to do that is to, one, be in a calorie deficit, so you're eating less calories than you're burning, and then additionally increasing your NEAT, so just doing more stuff throughout the day. As an athlete, not necessarily something that is beneficial to you because most athletes, especially higher level athletes, are at the point where they're burning enough calories during exercise that calorie burn during the shorter period of exercise probably is equal to or greater than that NEAT calorie burn. But I still put it on here to give you a frame of reference. So 30 to 33 calories per kilogram per day is what they recommend. This is not an important metric because the total energy expenditure is actually an easier metric to use, and I'll show you why later. But to just give you the whole concept and make everything as streamlined as possible, for a 130-pound athlete, they would need to be consuming somewhere between 1,800 and 1,900 calories per day, not including the calories that they're burning from exercise. And that is to be net zero. That is not gaining weight. That is not losing weight. And that's for the the vast majority. That's not for super low volume riders that are only riding like a couple hours a week, or super high volume riders that are doing 18, 20, 25 hours per week. This is for the vast majority of real world riders, athletes. But we can kind of ignore that. We don't necessarily need to do all of this math and additional things added on to our BMR and NEAT. We can just use total energy expenditure. In this study with the high-level adolescent runners, they determined that irrespective of gender, 51 to 58 calories per kilogram per day is roughly what they would experience in total energy expenditure. Simply, that just means that is the total amount of calories they burn throughout a day, including BMR, NEAT, and all of the exercise that they do it throughout the day. So, using that same 132-pound rider, 60 kilograms, they would need to be eating somewhere between 3,000 and 3,400 calories per day. That's a very large number, especially for a 130-pound athlete. And I think that can be a little eye-opening for you and see that probably you're not eating quite enough. And if you've never really tried tracking your calories before, I'll get into how to do this safely and effectively later. But if you have tracked your calories before, you may have noticed that you're probably not close to that. So now we have a pretty good understanding of how much we need to be eating throughout the day. The next step in optimizing our nutrition for performance is figuring out what exactly we should be filling those total calories with. That's going to be our macronutrients. So that's the things like carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. So starting with arguably the most important one for endurance athletes is carbohydrates. It is going to be your primary source of calories. It's going to be well over 50% of your calorie in your daily calorie intake if you're doing it correctly, for a couple reasons. One, it is relatively low calorie density. It's 4 calories per gram, as opposed to fats, which is more than double. So it takes more food, more physical volume of food to feel the same amount of less hungry as you're eating. I guess more full, I guess that's a better way of saying it. And more importantly is carbohydrates. Once you go beyond the endurance ranges, the more aerobic ranges during exercise, you'll begin to burn almost primarily or entirely carbohydrates based on how high the intensity is. So, like I mentioned before, during exercise, you want simpler sugars. During the rest of your general life, you want to strive for foods that are lower on the glycemic index generally, and more whole foods. So things like classic ideas would be like brown rice, whole grain foods like whole grain pasta and whole grain bread, and any kinds of fruits and vegetables are all good options for high or low glycemic index, high fiber content carbohydrates to be eating not during exercise. And then the second most important, probably equally as important really, is protein. It's pretty well understood in the general public that protein is important for athletes. It's very well understood that strength athletes need to be eating a lot of protein. They're trying to build muscle. Protein is important for building muscle. What is slightly less understood is that endurance athletes also need to be eating lots of protein. Sometimes, in a lot of cases, for high level endurance athletes, they need to be eating more protein than strength athletes. The reason why strength athletes are trying to consume a lot of protein is because that protein is fundamental for creating muscle. But for endurance athletes, as well as creating muscle, which happens to an extent, it is essential for repairing damaged muscle, which any kind of intense exercise is going to damage your muscle, and you need to provide that muscle with proteins in order to repair it and recover properly. And if you are doing both of those concurrently, so you're doing your endurance training, your aerobic cycling training, and then you're also lifting weights alongside of that, which is highly recommended for younger athletes for a multitude of reasons. Um, you want to be farther up on that range. You want to be consuming even more protein. So the recommended intake for endurance athletes in this adolescent range is between 1.2 to 1.8 grams per kilogram. So using that same 130-ish pound rider, we're looking at 72 to 108 grams of protein per day. If you are a concurrent strength training athlete, so you're riding and you're going to the gym at the same time, you want to be more on the higher end of that. If you're not, you can get away with being on the lower end of that, but generally, I would say it's probably better to be on the higher end of that to be safe. And then again, similar to the total energy expenditure, the total amount of calories you need to be eating throughout the day, this is irrespective of gender. It is the same for whatever your mass is. So if you're a 130-pound boy and a 130-pound girl, they would both have the same protein requirements. It's based off of weight, not necessarily gender. And finally, the least important but still vital macronutrient is fat. I don't necessarily worry about hitting specific targets for fat. I don't think anyone really should worry about it. However, it is essential for general bodily functions. It is important for hormones. It's important for keeping your internal organs safe and protected and insulated. So when you turn it into the body fat, that is, and it's you're more than likely gonna get enough of it from a well-rounded, balanced diet. So I wouldn't worry about tracking the total amount of fat you're eating throughout a day. You're probably getting enough if you're eating somewhat healthily. Like I mentioned before, this is 9 calories per gram. It's over twice as calorie dense as carbohydrates and proteins. Proteins are also 4 calories per gram. So that means it takes less food to get the same amount of calories. So this can be beneficial in one way and it can be a detriment in another way. It can be a detriment because if you're trying to lose weight, if that is one of your goals, it's harder to do that eating fats because it takes more of it to make you feel equally as full, and then you consume more calories doing so. However, on the flip side, if you are a one of those super high volume riders and you're a very powerful rider and you're doing 3 or 4 thousand calorie burn rides per day, it might be physically impossible for you to eat so much food from carbs and protein without feeling sick. So you may need to incorporate more fats just to reach um, your required total calorie intake per day. But for most junior athletes, this isn't not really an issue. So again, wouldn't really worry about it. A common question I also get asked is if endurance cycling, like in the endurance aerobic zones, fuels your muscles are fueled primarily from fats, which is true. When you're riding in the like classic zone 2 or below, your body is using almost entirely fats to create energy to move yourself forward. Why don't we consume more fats? Well, the reason why is one, it's easier to go above your total calorie expenditure allowance for the day. You can accidentally eat too many calories and then gain weight. Not necessarily what we want. Two, at those higher intensities, you're burning almost primarily glucose, sugar, carbohydrates. So your body your body at the lower intensities has no issue burning fats. It'll do it super easily. But once you go above a certain intensity threshold, pun intended, you will you'll not be able to actively reach those fat stores because the energy requirement, the amount of energy your body needs to create, or rather the rate that your body needs to create this energy, is too high, and your body just can't pull the energy from the fats quick enough. So if you intend to do any kind of higher intensity racing, doing things like the keto diet is not advised at all, because you could, in theory, make those aerobic zones super efficient, but once you try to ride higher intensity stuff, you just don't have the fuel for it. So now on to what is probably uh, the most often looked at portion of performance nutrition for cyclists is, how should I fuel during my workouts? Well, your workout, even if you're doing like a 4 hour long workout, there are 24 hours in a day. The actual riding period of your day is such an insignificant amount. It's a large amount, but it's an insignificant amount of time that the optimizing your nutrition outside of the riding aspect can lead to much greater long-term performance benefits than only focusing on the during nutrition and then just eating garbage all the time during the rest of the day. So moving on, let's imagine for a Miska rider that has, let's say this is a hypothetical varsity Miska rider that has a race at 9 in the morning on a Sunday. What should they be doing on Friday and Saturday as to fuel for the race? Well, this is all of these next few slides that I'm giving you for workout considerations are only really super beneficial for races or really hard workouts. Not necessary to do this every single ride, because it can get kind of mentally taxing to do so. But so it's going to take you 24 to 48 hours to fully replenish muscle glycogen. What does that mean? So, like I mentioned before, high intensity uses primarily carbohydrates or entirely carbohydrates um, above a certain level. That carbohydrate is stored in the form of glycogen in your muscles, your liver, and in your blood. When you exercise at high intensities, it's basically using your muscles and liver and blood like a fuel tank, and it's burning through all of those carbohydrates. And you only have set a limited amount of them. And when you're out, you have to fill the gas tank back up. And it takes a really long time to do that, because in order to move carbohydrates or sugar from your mouth into your blood and into your muscles, it requires insulin, which, if anyone is familiar with insulin, even in the slightest, they know that it can take long periods of time for your insulin hormones to stabilize and to change. So that's why it takes so long for this muscle glycogen replenish to happen. However, there is a little hack you can do to speed up this process. That insulin is very high, or the insulin sensitivity rather, is very high during exercise and immediately afterwards. So if you are doing your, again, with a Sunday race varsity rider, let's say on Saturday or even Friday evening, you're at the race course and you're doing your pre-ride with the team. If you want to jumpstart that glycogen replenish process, you want to be eating a high carb meal, ideally primarily sugars, immediately after that ride is finished. Because your insulin is so high, instead of taking 48 hours to go from 0% carbohydrates to 100% carbohydrates, you can go from 0% to 50 in maybe an hour or two in just that period. So now you only have to go 50% more of that glycogen to become replenished to be full, and you have 2 days to do it. And then you would have an additional ride probably on Saturday, and you can do the same thing, especially if you're not going super duper hard, and you're not really burning through all of your carbohydrate stores, which you shouldn't be doing the night before a race anyway. It's this is going to give you the best chance of jumpstarting that recovery process and making sure your fuel tank is completely full for the race. And the last thing is when you're actually eating your dinner before the race, so let's say this is Sunday night for a varsity rider riding on, or this is Saturday night for a varsity rider riding on Sunday morning, you want a low glycemic index, high carbohydrate meal. So the classic carb loading meal of a big plate of pasta or a bunch of potatoes, that's kind of what you're looking at. And then you can do this 2 days before as well. Now, moving on to immediately before your workout or immediately before your race. This is something you want to be testing regularly. You don't want to be going into a race and trying a new breakfast meal or a new drink mix or a new gel or something like that the day of the race or the morning of the race. You want to know that this is something that your stomach can handle. It's something that you can reasonably quickly eat, reasonably quickly digest, and it doesn't make you feel sick if you ride hard immediately after. So a couple examples for me is I really like white bread toast with jelly on it. I'll have oatmeal, like overnight oats made with water instead of milk with some fruit. Or I would have cereal with a lactose-free and fat-free milk. Not all at the same time, but those are three different options of things that I like to eat before races. And if you're looking at 2 to 3 hours before your race, so if you're a varsity rider riding at 9 a.m., we're looking at like a 6 a.m. breakfast, you can have a much more thorough, larger breakfast. You can have big stack of pancakes, some big waffles, a whole bunch of fruit, because you have more than enough time to digest a large portion of that or almost all of it before the race comes around, so you don't have it sitting in your stomach. It's not making you feel sick. However, if you don't like waking up that early, or you simply don't have it in your schedule to eat that far in advance to your race, within 1 hour of your race is also it's also possible to eat a good breakfast and uh, fuel pretty well for the race, but you need it in a much smaller quantity because you don't have quite as much time to digest that food. You need to make sure it's in a smaller amount, so if it doesn't fully digest, it's not quite as much sitting in your stomach, or you can more easily digest the whole thing and more quickly digest the whole thing. And then if we're moving on to the start line, would not recommend starting your breakfast on the start line or right as you're about to start a hard workout. This should be an additional supplemental thing. So after you've already had your 2 to 3 hour or your 1 hour breakfast, you can have at the start line while you're in the staging corral waiting to go off. You can have like your last gel, your last half a bottle of drink mix, some shot blocks, whatever it is you want. But in this case, you want it to be as simple of sugars as you can get because in that's the only way you can get it to digest as quickly as possible and more importantly, get it from your stomach into your bloodstream and into your muscles where you can actually use it for the race. Now, during the workout, during the race, sugar is pretty much all you should be consuming. Like I just said a minute ago, the quickest way to get the fuel from your mouth into your muscles so you can use it is by having it as a sugar. Your body needs to break down carbohydrates into a monosaccharide. If you're familiar with, or if you remember anything from like high school biology or high school chemistry, you have your monosaccharides for this purpose. The most important ones are fructose and glucose. So those are the only ones primarily that your small intestine can absorb and put into your blood. So if you are putting straight glucose in your mouth, it doesn't need to break it down. It can just put it straight into your blood when it gets into your small intestine. However, if you're eating a really starchy potato or something like that, your body needs to break down the potato into its subdivisions of smaller carbohydrates and then finally glucose and fructose. Then it can put it into your bloodstream. So the more simple sugar or the simpler of the sugar you can make it, the quicker you can actually get it absorbed in your bloodstream. Additionally, having more complex carbohydrates like that will sit in your small intestines, and because it's not getting absorbed immediately, it can cause stomach issues and basically sit in your small intestine and rot and ferment. And that's what causes a lot of upset stomach problems with endurance riders that are consuming a lot of maltodextrin. That's been a common issue with maltodextrin lately is if you consume it in large amounts because it's a highly complex glucose-derived carbohydrate. It is glucose, so your body can absorb it, but it needs to break it down a lot before it can absorb it. And it'll sit in your small intestine, and it'll take an hour or more to break it down before it can use it. So now you just have all of this maltodextrin in your small intestine blocking the transport um, the transporters that are supposed to move that glucose in your small intestine. So the ability to move it into your blood is now hindered, and then also it's just sitting in there rotting and it's making you feel sick. Well, how much of this sugar should you be consuming during a race? Anywhere between 30 to 90 grams is recommended. Once you go above that point, above 90 grams, even if you're a smaller rider and you're not riding super hard, 90 grams might be even within this range of causing stomach issues. But if you take too much of it, you'll have the same problem. A lot of it sitting in your small intestine and just essentially rotting and not doing anything. So you don't want you can definitely consume too much, and you will know when you're consuming too much because you'll feel sick. But you can also definitely consume too little, because this is where, if you're not fueling properly for very high intensity, especially longer, like hour and a half to 2 hour long races, which are common for XC races in Michigan, not necessarily MISCA ones. In that time period, you could theoretically deplete all of your glycogen stores. And if you are not constantly refueling throughout the race, you will just run the tank on empty. And now you have no energy left, or you have no carbohydrates to fuel your high intensity left. So all you're left with are the fats to fuel your ride. And then, if you remember earlier, the fats are responsible for low intensity energy production. So when you run out of that carbs, you basically gave yourself a rev limiter, and you cannot ride hard anymore. You can continue to ride because you have essentially unlimited fat stores for energy. You can ride for weeks and weeks on end and not run out of fat to fuel exercise. But that hour and a half to 2 hours is kind of a limit for carbohydrates and glucose. Now, a lot of people, they experiment with different types of foods throughout the race. However, you can get that 30 to 90 grams every hour uh, is more up to your preferences. How it actually sits in your stomach, how disgusted you are by the type of food in general, or just how convenient and easy it is. I generally prefer to take my calories, my carbohydrates, as a liquid form for a couple of reasons. One, it's in my bottles, so I'm going to be drinking my bottles anyway. It's super quick and convenient to do so. Two, I have a pretty good understanding of how much I need to drink within an hour for hydration, for general hydration purposes, how much to drink within a bottle. So I also have a pretty good understanding of, if I'm drinking one bottle every hour for hydration, if I put 60 grams of carbohydrates in a bottle, I am also consuming 60 grams of carbs every hour. I know a lot of people don't like the fully liquid fueling strategy, it kind of grosses them out. I definitely understand. So you can choose solid foods. So that's like the shot blocks, like regular Cliff bars. The gels, I would consider the gel a solid still, because I would consider a liquid anything that's in a bottle. So if you're squeezing your gel into your bottle, I would consider that a liquid also. But a gel or a solid is something that I consider having to take out of your pocket and open in order to eat. So that requires a little bit more planning in advance to adequately fuel for. So when you're pre-riding the day before or 2 days before a race, you need to be thinking, where on this course can I grab the food out of my pocket, or wherever you're keeping it? And are there enough places on this course for me to do that and still fuel optimally? I know for me, it's kind of too much effort mentally to remember to do that all the time, especially on a mountain bike course where you may not have the ability to easily take your hands off the bars very often. So that's why I prefer the liquid calories. But if you prefer the solid calories, you need to make sure you have a strategy for when and where you can fuel and if it is enough fuel. And then additionally with electrolytes, since we're talking about liquids, you can add additional electrolytes or just add electrolytes into your water. A lot of cycling or endurance fuels already have electrolytes in them. It's a good idea to check and see if they do. A lot of studies in the last handful of years have shown that during exercise, electrolyte replenishment is not necessarily super important for hydration because especially in the US where we consume a lot of sodium to begin with, our regular diet usually includes more than enough sodium to keep our sodium levels within our body still within a safe range even during exercise. The exceptions to this are when if it's very very hot and very long and you're also a heavy sweater. So if you're doing an hour long cross country race in the fall where it's 60 degrees, probably not an issue. So if you forget to take your electrolytes, you're not going to run into an issue. Electrolyte imbalance is also highly unlikely the cause of cramping. It's a very complex topic in research at the moment. Is like what exactly causes cramping during the exercise, and it's not likely that it's electrolytes. It's likely that it's some kind of fatigue within the processes that occur during exercise. But if you are if you're the type of person that thinks you need to be consuming electrolytes during your workout because you're a heavy sweater or whatever, you're not going to be harming yourself by taking them. But if you're not taking them and you're only doing like hour-long races, you're probably not really harming yourself either. So that's kind of up to your own discretion whether or not you want to use them. I don't really use them that often since I live in the desert here and it's 110 plus degrees in the summer. I will use them during the summer, but during most of my regular rides, I don't usually pay attention to them. Now, post workout, kind of alluded to this a little bit. You have this 1 hour ish window immediately after exercise where your insulin sensitivity is really high, and you can use this to to your advantage and jumpstart that glycogen replenishment process. What I tell a lot of my athletes is, like I mentioned before, 30 to 90 grams per hour during exercise. I tell them to extend that period. So if you're doing a 2 hour long workout or a 2 hour long race, fuel for 3 hours. Fuel for the additional hour after your workout is over. That way, you're still getting the kind of optimal uh, carb intake rate of 30 to 90 grams. I put 30 to 60 because you don't quite need that much immediately after a workout, but you're also still consuming relatively simple sugars. Now, you don't want to be consuming just only sugar, just carbohydrates. You also are going to need some protein. Like I mentioned before, protein's essential for repairing muscle damage after hard workouts. So we're looking at somewhere around 20 grams of protein immediately after a workout. So however you want to do this, if you remember the like the Got Milk commercials, the chocolate milk commercials, chocolate milk is still a really good recovery drink. It's got somewhere between 3 to 1 and 4 to 1 ratio of carbohydrates to protein, and that's kind of what we're looking at in this post workout window is a 3 to 1 or 4 to 1 carb to protein ratio. For myself, this really any dairy product kind of fits within this window. So I like Greek yogurt because it still has a little bit of like solid substance, like Greek yogurt and some fruit, maybe a little granola. That is really really close to that 3 to 1 or 4 to 1 ratio. You can make a protein shake that's not super crazy high in protein and still get the benefit as long as it has a decent amount of carbs in it. Really, whatever kind of foods that you enjoy eating and you can eat within that window. I also find it easy to, like I mentioned before, fuel like it's the race. So if it's difficult for you to eat an actual meal immediately after your workout, which a lot of people do because the race is so hard and their heart rate's so high, their stomach just can't handle eating real food. You can just drink drink those calories, drink your protein and your carbs in that 1 hour window, and you'll be good to go. Now, kind of a little bit of a controversial subject is supplements. I don't generally recommend supplements. I don't go out of my way to recommend supplements to junior athletes. They can be beneficial in certain circumstances. However, the the amount of benefit you get from somewhat optimizing your nutrition throughout the day is much greater than whatever additional benefit you're going to get by just adding supplements to a poor regular diet. It's also can be difficult to find safe, legal, and effective supplements. There are only a few that have been time and time again throughout research and in anecdotal data shown that they are effective for endurance athletes. I put the four that well, three really, and then an additional one that I really would only ever recommend because of their effectiveness and how safe they are. And that's beta alanine, caffeine, and nitric oxide. Beta alanine is an amino acid. It's found in a lot of like red meats and fish kind of stuff. Caffeine, I'm sure everyone is familiar with caffeine, and nitric oxide, which is the thing in beets and pomegranates and other red, dirty tasting foods like that, that is good for your blood vessels and your heart. Additionally, one that I would recommend for just about everyone is just a daily multivitamin. Taking it is not going to harm you, and if you are lacking in some mineral or nutrient or vitamin, then it's going to help you out in the long term. I don't. Another reason why I don't generally recommend supplements to junior athletes is they're relatively expensive for the amount of benefit that you get. The just general eating, making your regular diet more well-rounded, a little bit healthier, following within these guidelines, you're going to get a lot more out of it than just kind of eating garbage and then just adding some extra beta alanine in the mornings. You're not really going to get a whole lot extra out of that. I also did not add any like strategies for how to take these because supplements are pretty nuanced in the amount that you should take based off of your goals, how much you weigh. The timing of it can affect how much you should take and when you or like how you take it also. So it's a very complex, nuanced subject. So if you're interested to see if one, it would benefit you, or two, how to actually implement them, feel free to send me an email, and I can kind of work on figuring out a plan that would probably work for you if that is something that I think would work for you. Now, that's a bunch of information, a lot of pretty technical aspects. So, how in the real world would you actually make these changes to your own diet? First off, the only way to know whether or not you're feeling optimally is to track what you're eating. There's no way around it. I don't recommend athletes track everything they eat forever or even for very long periods of time. I think it can lead to unhealthy relationships with food. However, I do think it's important to at least once or twice a year kind of track somewhere between 3 and 7 consecutive days without changing your diet. So you're not being like, I eat a piece of cake every evening, but I'm not going to track it, or I'm not going to eat it this week because I don't want my coach to think that I'm eating cake. Track exactly what you're eating. Don't change a thing. That way you have an idea of what exactly your diet looks like. After you have that short period of time, you can kind of intuitively, as you're eating over the next several months or however long, you can, in the back of your mind, remember, oh, I'm not eating enough carbs, so maybe I should choose this carb food instead of this fatty food. Um, and then my next advice for, again, kind of preventing that unhealthy relationship with food is to be accurate enough. I kind of get made fun of often because I use a scale to weigh my food, but I personally think it's easier to just put a bowl on a scale pour whatever I'm eating into the bowl, and now I know exactly how many grams it is, and I can just do a simple calculation in my head of how many calories it is, as opposed to using measuring cups or some other method. But all of the nutrition labels on the back of foods are generally estimates. Well, they're always estimates and averages. And the same thing, like I mentioned early in the presentation, that all of the um, all the calorie expenditure calculations are more or less estimates as well. So being super precise in a very small portion of your eating is not going to make your calculations any more accurate. So be accurate enough. Don't go weighing all of your iceberg lettuce to see how many single extra calories you're adding to your meal. As long as you're close enough, that's really all that matters. Now, in what order should you make these changes after you've actually tracked all of that fueling? How can I optimize from that point? So the quickest and easiest way is just the making changes during your ride. It'll make the most drastic changes the quickest, because if you're under fueling during your workouts or races for that matter, and then you go to properly fueling, you will very quickly notice the difference between your performance. Fitness may or not change, your recovery may or may not change, but your actual performance during the workout changes. So that would be my first one to work on optimizing. It's relatively easy to do. And then the next one is total daily calories and being consistent about it. Like I said, very beginning of the presentation, you're probably not eating enough. If you're eating too few calories, just find ways that you can add more calories into your diet, whether that's eating snacks here and there throughout the day, eating a little bit larger breakfast, things like that. And then after that would be your macro split. Now you've got your ride nutrition pretty good. You're eating more than enough calories throughout the day. The next step would be making sure you're eating primarily carbohydrates. You're eating more than, or you're eating within that range of protein that is required, and whatever fat you're getting is not such a large percentage of your daily calorie intake that it's kind of overwhelming the other things. And then finally is just eating generally healthier. This is super important for general lifestyle or longevity and quality of life. So I put it on here still. You can do this concurrently with all of the other things, which I would actually recommend. And also by making all of these other changes, you are probably choosing healthier options anyway. So that would be like the healthier carb options, like I mentioned before, like lower GI, higher fiber carbohydrate foods when you're not working out or not immediately before a workout. Eating more vegetables, which I know a lot of younger athletes struggle with, and kind of making sure that your fats are not coming from all kinds of junk food, garbage kind of stuff. Now, before I move on, I got two case studies here just to give you an example of how to actually put those things into practice. So before we move on, does anyone have any questions? I don't. This is kind of running a little bit longer than I was expecting, so I don't want to keep anyone too late. The next two slides are just practical examples to put all of the things I just said into play. But before I do that, does anyone have any questions? Not really seeing anything yet. So I'm just going to move on. I think it might be a longer delay on my live stream than I thought. But I'm going to use myself as an example because I'm very intimate with the way I eat. I know how I eat very well. Uh, the one caveat to this example is I am not an adolescent. So let let's look at a couple important details about myself. I'm 150 pounds. I have a 310-watt FTP, and I ride somewhere between 14 and 18 hours a week. So I am one of those riders that I mentioned that I'm a little bit on the higher end as term of power, and a little bit on the higher end in terms of the amount of hours that I ride throughout the week. They're not super duper high. These are not anything out of the question for like a varsity rider, but it's on the higher end of the scale. And then some lifestyle information. I work 4 days a week, and I commute almost every single one of those days. So I ride really early in the morning and relatively late in the evenings. So looking at some of my actual ride data, on average, I burn somewhere between 10,500 calories per week just from riding, which averages out to about 1,500 calories per day. Using that 33 calorie per kilogram uh, per day BMR plus NEAT calculation, I get 2,250 calories per day. If we add those two together, I get 3,750 calories. And if we look at the total energy expenditure calculation, which is the one that I think you should be using instead, we get that range there, somewhere between 3,500 and 4,000 calories. And my more complex calculation falls pretty much right exactly in the middle of that. So instead of having to do all of these calculations, you can just use the estimated total energy expenditure to get a rough idea of where you should be, like a range you should be eating throughout the day. Now, what exactly do I need to be eating throughout that 35 to 4,000 calories? 1.2 to 1.8 grams per kilogram of protein, like we mentioned before. I got 82 to 122 grams. My actual ride fuel, on average, I'm eating somewhere, or I'm riding between 2 hours and 15 minutes per day, and then I'm on average 60 grams of carbs per hour. So that's about 135 grams of carbs per day, and then an additional 60 grams from my post-workout meal and 20 grams of protein that I am also consuming in that post-workout meal. That means, not including the protein and my ride fuel stuff, I should be eating an additional 2,500 calories from carbohydrates and fat, ideally primarily from carbohydrates. Let's look at kind of a hypothetical average day of eating for me. I'm consuming, or I need to be consuming, somewhere around 2,900 calories per day, not including just my riding and just my post workout meal. So I wake up early in the morning, I eat my white bread toast with some jelly, like I mentioned before. During work, I'll have like some fruits or some granola bars, like relatively small snacks. Doesn't really add up to a whole lot of calories. And then just because I have not been in the habit of doing my meal prepping stuff and I want to show you what like an actual person eats, I pretty often will go across the street to the Mexican takeout place and get a tostada with a Coke. I get the tostada because it's like the only thing that they sell that has vegetables on it, and I want to at least lie to myself and tell myself I'm eating kind of healthy. And then for dinner, when I get home, I'll make something like spaghetti with beef and some red sauce. And then my at-home snacks, I would kind of put this before dinner. This is kind of like immediately after I get home. I'll have cereal with whole milk. That's kind of my second post-workout meal. And then if we add all of this together, we get roughly 2,600 calories, which is about a 300 calorie deficit to that 2,900 calories that I said I needed. And if we move on to my nutrition audit, that 300 calorie deficit can be explained by two things. One, these calculations are designed for adolescents, and I'm not an adolescent. Adolescents typically will have a higher BMR, and so their general daily requirements for eating is going to be higher than mine. Additionally, I am actively trying to lose weight. I have a couple races coming up that I do need to lose weight for, so I was trying to be in a small calorie deficit. I don't think it's 300 calories per day. I think it's a little bit less than that, but this is what the calculations are telling me. I'm also eating somewhere between 90 to 100 grams of protein a day. That's pretty much right in the middle of the recommended uh, range that I gave myself. But what are some things that I can improve on? Definitely not eating enough vegetables. That's an easy one. Just for general longevity and quality of life and health, I should be eating more vegetables. More whole foods, same thing. And then possibly a little bit more protein because I'm also concurrently strength training. I should be on the higher end of that range instead of right in the middle. I probably get a little bit more benefit out of it. And Again, with the whole foods, I should be eating things that are not quite so sugary and snacky throughout the day. I can replace like my candy kind of granola bar snacks with some healthier options like other fruits and vegetables. But as far as the all the other recommendations I gave throughout this presentation, it's more or less okay for the performance aspect. There's definitely some general health things that I can do to make it better, but as far as performance is concerned, it's pretty good. And now let's move on to second and the last one too. Hypothetical varsity racer. We're looking at someone who's this is hypothetical. This is not actual data. Let's say someone is 140 pounds. They have a 270-watt FTP, and they're riding 8 to 14 hours per week. They're a student. Obviously, they're going to school Monday through Friday, and they have afternoon, evening practices several times a week. Or actually, every time that they ride is in the afternoon or evening because of school. So I just did a couple back of the napkin calculations with the FTP and the amount of hours, and I determined based off of some historical data I have with a lot of athletes, on average, this type of rider would be burning somewhere around 8,700 calories per week just from the riding, which is 1,240 calories a day. Going through all the other calculations, but we don't need to necessarily worry about them. But doing all those calculations, that number that we come up with sits pretty much right in the middle of the total calorie expenditure uh, range that I recommended at the beginning. So this is another example of how doing all of the complication or calculations and trying to be as precise as possible is equally as precise or accurate as just using the range. Now, same thing, requirements for this person 76 to 114 grams of protein a day. They're riding a little bit less than I was for on average, so they're going to be consuming a little bit fewer carbs. But their post workout meal is going to be the same, which leaves them with a little bit fewer calories than I was doing with mine that they need to consume from carbs and fat. And now nutrient timing, they are kind of what they're eating throughout the day. They're left with 2,600 calories per day, not including the riding stuff. So let's say this hypothetical athlete, I'm kind of going back to when I was in high school and thinking of kind of picking from both sides of the spectrum of like pretty unhealthy and then some kind of healthy foods, um, and kind of putting them together. So let's say for breakfast, or this hypothetical athlete is eating a sausage, egg, and cheese McGriddle from McDonald's. During lunch, they're eating a couple of fruits and vegetables and granola bars and kind of snacks. Throughout the day between classes, for lunch, which we will call their 3 hour pre workout meal, it's just like a ham and cheese sandwich with like a bag of chips and a chocolate milk. And then their immediately pre workout meal, this is like right after class, right after school, before practice, they're going to eat a peanut butter and jelly. And then after their ride is done, when they get home, they're eating some potato soup with some vegetables in it. So this is just kind of a hypothetical example of what an athlete might be eating. So this athlete is in a surplus of 260 calories, but they might still be underfueled. Why is this? So they're eating more calories than they should, or than is within that range, or at least on the higher end of that range. However, the vast majority, or a very large portion of those calories, are coming from fats. So even though they're eating enough calories, um, they're not properly replenishing all of that glycogen between their workouts. They're not showing up to their practices or their races with topped up a full energy tank with glycogen. So that is a very low hanging fruit that they could definitely work on. They meet their protein requirements. That's not really an issue. This hypothetical athlete probably looked at a sausage, egg, and cheese McGriddle, saw it had a bunch of protein in it, figured that was a somewhat healthy option to be eating in the morning, which is not a bad way to look at it. But it is also super high in fat, which is part of the reason why this athlete may be underfueling while still eating on the higher end of their calorie recommended calorie expenditure. And then what could they improve? Obviously, same thing with the majority of younger athletes. Should probably be eating more vegetables. Like I already said, there's a lot of fatty foods in here. They should probably be replacing some of those fatty foods with higher carb options. So if we're looking at that sausage, egg, and cheese, they could replace it. If they want to continue to go to McDonald's, they could probably just get whatever the pancake thing is called. So that's a higher carbohydrate meal, and then supplement that with some other kind of slightly lower fat, a little bit healthier protein. So we're looking at like Canadian bacon, like ham, cured ham, not like actual bacon, is typically a little bit lower in fat. So that kind of thing would probably work out well for them. The potato soup, also super high in fat. A quick little side note: if you're looking at soups, if the broth is like kind of clear and you can see through it, or like kind of see through it, it's typically lower in fat. Versus if it's a like a creamy, opaque, you can't see through it, typically really high in fat. And then the last kind of general quality of life kind of thing is normalizing the meal sizes. If we go back for a second, we can see they got almost 1,000 calories for lunch and 800 calories for dinner, but then they only ate 500 calories for breakfast, and then everything else is kind of small. If they did a little planning beforehand and try to normalize their meals, maybe ate a little bit more for breakfast, ate a little less for lunch, uh, the pre-workout's probably okay, and then ate a little bit less for dinner, so their total calories equaled out to the same, but all their meals are roughly the same size or a little bit closer in size. Uh, it would probably be a little bit better for them because it would kind of normalize the hormones and normalize the blood sugar and all that kind of stuff. But it may or may not have a significant impact on their nutrition, but it's still an important thing for general quality of life and longevity that they should be looking at. And for a lot of things, if it's healthier, it's probably better for your performance on the bike as well. So that was everything I had for this kind of in-depth nutrition, performance nutrition for juniors presentation. I'm going to sit here for a little bit. If anyone else has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer any. And I'm glad all of you came here and joined me. And hopefully you all learned some really important information. I think I'll probably stay here for like 5 more minutes in case anyone has any additional questions about anything or just anything they want to add. If you type a comment in the YouTube comment the chat area, I'll be able to see it and gladly answer whatever questions you have. It's not really looking like anyone has any additional questions, so I'm gonna wrap it up. I'm hope all you guys have a great rest of your night, and thank you all for coming. And it was nice having a little chat with all of you.